Okay, so hello and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. In this video we'll be doing part 3 of the item system mini-series. So far we have created some basic item data, we have defined the logic for an inventory, what it needs to have and what it needs to do, and then we actually wrote the logic for how it does that. And in this video we need to actually put that all together and make some user interface so that we can have the inventory with item slots, and you can drag the items between the slots to move them, or drag them onto other slots to stack them, or swap them if they're different items. And then obviously we can add more functionality to this in the future. We can add stack splitting, for example, is something that people requested. But for now we just want to get everything we've done so far visual and actually usable. As always, if you haven't already, check out my Twitch, the link is on the screen, and also the link to my GitHub page is there as well, so you can go check out the code for this project and all my other projects from, about a week ago onwards is when I started putting everything on GitHub, so everything from then on will be on there. Before we get into the coding, I'd like to thank my patrons, with special thanks to Flowstate Games, Average Morning, Thomas Huster, Remy Baldwin, and Phil Baum. If anyone else would like to help support the channel community to keep these videos coming, the link is in the description below. But apart from that, let's get into the video. Okay, so now we can get into actually making it, but one thing I'm just going to mention is I already recorded this video all the way through to the point where everything is working, but one problem I had was the video was about 50 to 60 minutes long, and I really don't want to do a video like that, so I'm going to split this UI part into 2 videos. Considering it's a mini-series, I think it's okay to do that. You guys would probably rather have like 2 20 to 30 minute videos rather than one like hour long video, and especially for me editing and rendering and uploading it, that's like much better. So to be honest, in this video, there might also not be much visual stuff going on, but we're going to code all of it ready to shove onto the UI. Because in the end, the actual UI, how I designed it, you might want to do it slightly differently anyway. But yeah, without further ado, we'll start getting into the coding for the UI. This will all be about, referencing text and images and enabling things and disabling and dragging. That's what we're going to focus on right now. Okay, so the first script you're going to have to make is the item slot UI class. This is going to be the base class for every different type of item slot. So we're going to have inventory slots, hotbar slots, spell slots, whatever you want. This is the base class for all of that. So it's going to be abstract because nothing is going to be of type item slot UI. It's just going to all inherit. And we're going to use the iDrop handler because slots are going to need to have logic for what happens when you drop things onto them. So if you drop an item onto an inventory slot, then it's going to try and either put it there or stack it or swap it or whatever. That's what we need to define here. We're going to need to reference an image because every item slot is going to have an image of some kind, no matter what type it is. It's going to have an icon. So we need to bring in an image called the, item icon image. But this isn't going to be private actually, it's going to be protected because we want to access it in our child classes. But let's just make that import. So we've got the unityengine.ui. We also need to store a protected int slot index, like so. And that's going to be a get private set. So we want to set the slot index here, but we want to be able to reference it from elsewhere. Then we want to make a public because we want to access this externally. Abstract hotbar item, which is obviously the base class for items, and this one will be a getter and a setter. So get set. I need to actually give it a name. So the slot item, like so. Just because it's a getter and setter doesn't mean we technically need to actually be able to set it, and I'll get into that when we write the inventory slot. You'll see what I mean. But the point is, we're going to have item slots for the hotbar and the inventory and the spells things, but different slots are going to get their items in different ways. So obviously the inventory is going to reference the inventory, and the hotbar is going to reference the hotbar, and the spell book is going to reference the spell book, and all that lot. Or the spell slots are going to reference the spell book anyway. So we need to be able to tell, essentially, whatever's referencing us, the item we're referencing, the item we're representing. Then we want to actually set the slot index and stuff. So I'm going to say on enable, we want to update our slot UI. So obviously whenever we open and close the inventory, we want to make sure it's up to date. Well, whenever we open it, essentially. Now, update slot UI we haven't actually written yet, so we're going to write that in a minute. Is it going to let me? Yeah, just do it like that. We're going to write a protected function so we can override it. Well, protected virtual void start. because the start function might be different for the children. So we're just going to say, by default, all we do when we first ever, when this item first exists, we're going to say, well, our slot index is going to be equal to our transform.getSiblingIndex, which is a built-in function for checking where we are in the hierarchy. And then we're going to call update slot UI. So technically, update slot UI gets called twice when you first open it, but that's actually okay because we need to know the slot index to actually set it correctly. Otherwise, it'll get the wrong item. So this is just when we first ever open the inventory, and then this is every time we open it. Because start only gets called once, enable gets called every time. And then we need to say, well, we're going to have some way of handling logic for when we drop on the slot, as I said. So on drop, it takes in pointer event data. Event data is what they usually do. And if it's abstract, that means we don't have to, well, it's an abstract void. We don't have to define what actually happens here. We do that in our child classes. But this iDrop handler is now happy because we're saying we're going to take care of it. And then another abstract function we're going to need to define in the children is how to update the slot UI. So update slot UI. Obviously, for a hotbar slot, you have cooldowns to worry about. You have the little radial thing going around and the number saying how many seconds are left on this slot, whereas the inventory doesn't have that. So, and the spellbook might have different ways of doing the UI. So you want to just say, yeah, we need a function that's a void that updates the slot UI. And then finally, you want a virtual void for enable slot UI. So we're going to, and when you're taking a boolean, whether we're enabling it or disabling it, so enable. So I'm going to set the item icon image dot enabled equal to that. So no matter what the slot is, the item icon is going to be enabled and disabled, essentially. And then maybe for the inventory, you're going to want to enable and disable the quantity text. That says like how many of it you've got. For the spells, you might want to enable, disable something else. But for this, that's all we need to do. Okay, so that's this class done. All these things should be happy. We get no errors here anymore. Let's just remove these usings that we don't need. And this is the base class for any item slot. I'm just going to space these out actually to be consistent so every function has a line between them. Okay, and to be honest, we can also just use that now to be keeping everything like that. It's all neat and tidy. Okay, so now we have the class for an item drag handler. So this is going to be the code that handles when we mouse over and click and drag an item. We want the item icon to like follow the cursor around, and when we release, we want to call something on the slot that we release on, if it's a slot, saying like, hey, we dropped this item on you, are you going to do anything about it? Like that's what this class does. Now we're going to expand upon this in the future, and there'll be certain systems I've created in previous tutorials that I want to implement to this mini-series, and I don't want to have to do, separate videos rewriting the entire systems again. So for those things, I'll probably just copy and paste them in, I'll drag the files in, and if you guys want access to that code, then obviously you can just check the GitHub page and get that little bit you need, or you can go back and watch those videos specifically, which I can always tell you about. For this video, I'll try and stay away from that, just to focus on the UI specifically. But for example, when you mouse over the item slots, you want to be able to have the pop-up of the item data. So we want to raise an event, and I've done a video on the scriptable object event system, which is what I'm going to be bringing in without rewriting it all, because I've already done a separate video on that. But for now, we just want to say I pointer down handler, and I might as well import so I can get the IntelliSense. So we've got I pointer down handler, then we also have I drag handler, I pointer up handler, I pointer enter handler, and I pointer exit handler. So essentially, these are all the things to do with the UI that we need to write functions for, and there's a lot, but we'll get through it bit by bit. And this just allows this item thing to have lots of logic. It's very useful. We'll get through it. We'll get through it. Just be calm and be patient. So we need to have reference to a protected item slot UI, which is the class we just wrote, basically. We're going to have reference to one of those. And then we're also going to have reference to some events, but I'm not going to do that yet. As I said, I'll stay away from that just for this video. Canvas group, which is what we're going to put on the UI. On the inventory slots, we're going to have a canvas group element, so we're going to need reference to that. We're going to need reference to a transform, our original parent. So when we're dragging a slot and then we release, we want it to snap back to its original parent. And then we'll store a private bool for is hovering, so that when we, stop hovering and stuff, we can then say, hey, we've stopped hovering this item, so get rid of that pop-up UI, for example. And I'm also going to add on a tag at the top, require component type of canvas group, just to make sure this element has to have the canvas group on itself for this to work. It's just a safety check as such. Now we're going to write public item slot UI, item slot UI as a getter, because we might want to reference this in our other classes. That we'll get onto that when we actually use it. Obviously at the moment it says 0 references, but it has about like 7 references when we're done with it. And when we start, we want to say the canvas group is equal to get component canvas group. But obviously the children classes might want to override this. I think it's fine as it is. We'll just leave it as a private void start for now. And then what happens on disable? Well, on disable, if we're hovering this slot, so if is hovering, then is hovering is false. And I'm going to put a comment here for now, just saying raise event, because we're going to be doing the event raising at some point, but that's not right now. Then what happens when we do public virtual void on on pointer down, pointer event data? Okay, so for this we want to say, well, if the event data button, so if the button we're pressing is equal to the left mouse button, then we want to, well, I'll just put raise event, and then we want to say, whoops, doesn't seem to like that. Our original parent is equal to our current parent before we actually do anything with it. What's going on here? Equals. Then we want to say transform.setParent, so we've got a new parent, which will be transform.parent.parent. I never really found a better way of doing this, but essentially it just means we're going to set our parent to be the one 2 up from this. And this is consistent with all my inventory slots in like every time I've used the system, so it's never caused any problems. Maybe you want to actually have that as a variable at the top for what parent it's going to be, but this is perfectly fine for what we're doing anyway. And then canvas group dot blocks raycasts equals false, and that's to do with the whole, when you're dragging this item around over another slot, you want the computer to ignore the item you're dragging and look at what's underneath it. So when you drop this item on another slot, you don't want it to think you've dropped it on itself, you want it to drop on the item below it. This will all make sense when we actually start plugging in all these scripts and variables, but obviously we need to write the code first and get all that done. There's quite a bit to do. Public virtual void on drag takes in pointer event data as well, event data. So if the event data dot button is the left mouse button, then transform dot position is equal to input dot mouse position. So we can essentially make the, if we're dragging the slot, then we're going to set its position to be wherever our cursor is. That's that thing done. Next, public virtual void on pointer up, pointer event data. So when we release, we'll say if the event data dot button is the left mouse button, then we're going to say transform.setParent back to the original parent. So we've released, we want to set it back to the original, and make sure that our local position is just vector3.0, so we're back where we started. And then canvas group dot blocks raycasts is true now, so we're back to what it was at the start. Cool. And then at the end we're going to say, let me just copy and paste this in, it'll just save some time. This would be where we raise event and so on, because that's where we're going to actually have these events. But this is done now, so if you want to see this quickly, public void on pointer exit and on pointer enter, we're just going to set and change that. But the reason why I've made these virtual is because our child classes might want to change those essentially. But this will always be the same. Okay, so the next class we need to make is an inventory item drag handler, which is, if you've guessed correctly, is going to inherit from item drag handler that we just wrote. This class is just going to basically have the specific logic for when you drag an inventory item as opposed to the hotbar item and the spell slots. So public override. We can override all these ones that we made virtual. We're just going to override the onPointerUp, which is when you release the slot. So we're just going to say if event data dot button is the left mouse button, then we want to do the base logic, and then say if event data dot hovered dot count is less than or equal to 0. I mean, it should only ever be 0, so I guess I'm put 0. If it's equal to 0, then we want to destroy item. This is also one of those things we're going to do later on in the series, but when you release an item and you're releasing it over nothing, essentially you're just releasing it into the world, then this is destroy item or drop item. It's up to what system you want to make, but generally games will either have you drag the item out of the inventory and it gets destroyed, or it'll do a pop-up window saying, would you like to destroy this, or are you sure? And then some games will just drop it on the floor as the prefab. So depending on which one of these, I guess I'll cover both those systems at some point, but that's what that's going to do. And then this script is going to be placed upon our inventory slots. Okay, so as I said, we're now going to make the inventory slot. Now, yeah, in this video, I already recorded it, as I said, and I didn't have time to cover every little bit in this video. So I really want to just get the coding done now, so that next video will just be a video of essentially putting on scripts, setting up UI scaling, like docking things to the side, dragging in text elements and image elements. I hope you guys are alright with that. Obviously, some people are saying, it'd be nice to see the visual stuff as we go along, but with this kind of system, it'd be very hard to do that, because obviously I'm designing it with the end goal in mind, where I'm doing the whole inheritance of the different types of slots and stuff. So if you wanted to see the visuals, then I'd have to code it poorly to show it and then refactor it all. That would take much longer and be a mess. So I hope you guys are right with that. But yeah, so we've got the new inventory slot. This is going to be a type item slot UI. So this is going to define, how an inventory slot is different to a hotbar slot in terms of the UI. So I drop handler. Okay. So this class is going to need to have reference to the inventory. So private inventory. Just call it the inventory. And then it's going to need reference to item quantity text. So we're going to say sales field private item quantity text. That's of type text mesh pro UGUI. So text mesh pro UGUI. That's so that we can obviously set the text in the inspector. In the inspector we need to set it. So we can display, whether we've got 2 of an item or 5 or 10 or whatever. But if we've got 1, then we don't really want to display it. We'll just set the text to blank, but we'll get to that in a second. Now that virtual item slot we set earlier, for the slot item, we need to override that now for the slot item. Now this chucks in some, recommended way to do it, but I'm changing that. I'm just going to do it on a 2 lines thing here, saying get return item slot dot item, which will be fine in a second. And then for setting, actually I'm just gonna leave that how it is just for now. So this item slot I was on about, the item slot, we are going to get, like so, the inventory dot, and then we need to call a function that we haven't written there yet, but we'll say inventory dot get slot by index, and we'll pass in our slot index. So I need to write a function in inventory. Just right at the top, I'm going to say public item slot get slot by index, which will take in an integer index, and it's just going to return item slots index. because we don't want to pass back the entire item slot array whenever we do this. We just want to pass back the slot they want. So now, whenever we refer to item slot in here, it just gets it from the inventory, okay? Now let's write the on drop, so it looks like this. So on drop, what happens? Well, we need to refer to the item drag handler. So we say item drag handler is equal to event data dot pointer drag dot get component item drag handler. So we're saying when we drop something on this slot, try and get an item drag handler script from the thing that dropped us. If it's null, so if item drag handler is null, then we return. So it just means we dropped something without an item drag handler, which technically should never happen, but maybe we'll have other things we drag that are nothing to do with items. You never know. And then we say, well, if, and then we need to cast it to be an inventory slot. So if item drag handler dot item slot UI as inventory slot does not equal null. So we're saying if it's another inventory slot that we've dropped on this inventory slot, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to say inventory dot swap item. So swap, and then we have to pass in the two indexes to swap. We wrote that function. So we're going to pass in the item drag handler dot item slot index. Except that is currently not available. Apparently I didn't do that. Just give me 1 second, sorry. How do I get the slot index? Oh, did I write the wrong thing? Where have I gone now? Inventory slot. Get the item drag handler dot item slot UI dot slot index. That's apparently a feature that I haven't added. Where's my item slot UI? I made it protected. That's my bad. Public. There we go, cool. And then we do comma, and then the other index we want to pass in is our current index. So we're swapping that one with ours, a slot index. Cool. And then how do we update this slot? Well, when we update the slot, so override update slot UI, we want to say, well, if the item slot that we're currently representing, if the item for it is null, then we want to call the enable function that we made earlier, but pass in false to disable it, and then return because we're done. Else, we want to say enable slot UI true, because we're, enabling it. And then we want to set the sprite, so the item icon image dot sprite equal to the slot we're representing, which is item slot dot item dot icon. And we want to set the item quantity text dot text equal to, and then we want to say, well, if the item slot's quantity is greater than 1, then we'll set it equal to the item slot's quantity to string. Else, we'll set it to a blank string. If there's 1 or 0, then we want it to be, just an empty string. And then at the end, we want to override the enable slot function. We want to do the base, which will do the icon, but we will also want to say, for our sake, we want to enable the, or disable, wait, that's not right. Enabled the item quantity text to toggle that on and off as well. So that's done for that script. Apart from apparently the set. Yeah, okay. So we'll just say set, nothing. I might have to change that at some point. It works just fine, but obviously it's a bit messy just having a set with nothing in it. But this works just fine. Okay, so that's everything I actually want to do for this video. This one should be a bit shorter than the other videos. The next video coming in 2 days' time, so on the 28th, will be, I promise, the actual, UI hooking it up, because we've just written the code to do the hooking up. But if I was now to add on to the end of this video, creating the UI and plugging it all in, that would take an extra 10 to 15 minutes probably. So I'll give that its own separate video. An off camera, off video, I'll sort out the folders, so it's nothing important that you need to worry about. I'll just change the folders around. As always, every time I do changes like that, I'll update the GitHub page, so just check that out. The link was at the start of this video, and it'll be in the description as well. And I might also off camera bring in the scriptable object event system that I was on about, but that video, if you go look at my channel, I might also put a link below if I remember, to the scriptable object event system. You'll see how to set it up, because we'll be using it so that we can, every time we add an item to the inventory, we can then raise an event so that the inventory slots on the UI will say, you know, it'll know to update them, rather than having hard references between them, which is problematic, because what if, like, you're in a scene with the inventory existing, but for example, the UI is disabled or not there. You don't want to have errors saying, you know, oh, can't tell the inventory slots to update because they're not there. Singletons are a bad thing. I used to think they were good, and a lot of people did, but as you get better and more experienced, you realize singletons are like nightmares to work with. So yeah, I hope you liked this video. If you did, then leave a like and subscribe. It'd mean a lot. Check out my Twitch streams every 2 days, alternating with my videos. So obviously tomorrow will be stream, day after will be a video. My streams at the moment are currently me developing a roguelike game, so if you want to go check that out, then feel free to. Check out the Discord server as well, link in the description below, so you can come and ask questions and show off what you've been making and just be part of the community. Any support on Patreon would be greatly appreciated, but apart from that, thanks for watching, and goodbye.